like you said with COVID, bro, to see people highly educated, doctors, no matter who it was, man, to see what happens when that fear created and amplified, you know what I mean, through politicians and the media, which was mostly not real. But to see people when that's activated in the psyche at a collective level, how, you know, basically the survival mechanism kicks in, and the logical and rational thinking and the balance is just completely gone. And you're talking to people, mate, who a couple of weeks ago you could talk to in a normal conversation, and then now they'll come over to my house, man, and be like, they're like they're about to die, mate. Like they're freaked out. Like, lock everyone up. We should kill those unvaccinated. Like, absolutely incredible to witness and see, man, because it gives you an insight into history too, eh? Like, the Nazis, and you kind of see now how that all happens, eh, man?
Yeah.
Unbelievable, man. So
I,
yeah, at another level, I guess that's just me saying being out of school and then thinking, mate, I want to do my own thing and be creative and yeah.
well, we definitely share a lot of, common beliefs and how we see the world. I think what grabs me about what you say is Carl Jung talks about the collective unconscious. So, like, we're not even sort of aware that we're living in fear. And we've come to normalize like fight, the fight or flight sort of response as something like that's a normal state of being. Actually, Joe Dispenza says it's an altered state of being, and that flow is actually, a state of being which we should be in, if we would teach these things in school. And, it all sort of links to how we see ourselves in relationship to the world, to whatever, created the world. And the fact that I think we don't have that, we often, get stuck in the fear, the fear that's being thrown around. And so, in my own life, I've had struggles too. I've seen how I thought, I would do things differently than my parents in certain ways. And I realized that as I got older, some of the patterns you talked about, patterns, I've had similar patterns when it comes to money. And it's sort of, in my 50s, I realized like my goal now is to change the trajectory of my children's lives. And by going and changing myself, because I realized as a pro hockey player playing in the Olympics, I changed superficially. I chased things, but
Mm.
deep down, I didn't change at my core. So I was still functioning anxiety and in fear. And you accomplish things too, but it's the way you accomplish it. It doesn't feel like accomplishments. And I think life, funny how life is, it's probably sees that there's a capacity in me to awaken, to raise my my level of consciousness. So it puts me in a situation where I'm forced to go much deeper. And it's been a hard journey, I have to say, after my hockey career, but it's really forced me to develop this deeper faith. What is it all about, and what am I all about? Am I, the fear, the anxiety, the thoughts that I have, the worries? And I realized that, I'm going to post something this morning, but it's pretty deep. is I realize I'm not my thoughts and emotions. This
Mm.
is just a sort of, programming that's I've gotten accustomed and that's been repeated in my generational in previous generational patterns. And so what totally interests me about flow is how do you and I really do believe what you share, it starts with the mind. It's your capacity to be able to influence your own state, you know, what place, the things that I'm doing or you're doing, what is the state associated to it? Why are we doing it? I think those things are so fundamental. And I think you can link it back to the cool school system. It's like if the why was so much more powerful, if we look to empower our kids and teach them about themselves, like what's possible, like what is human potential, because kids are, they got it, man. They got the capacity to let go, to turn on a dime when it comes to like the experience and emotion, and then like they can let it go really quickly. And just that expression, they have that expression, and then somewhere slowly I think it gets cut off. And so for me, I feel what's driving me is showing my kids. They didn't see me in the prime of my career, but even though they see the accomplishments, they see that I had a tendency to struggle. So I'm wanting to, that's what's driving me right now, is to change that, and to break away from things like anxiety, or just, it's no longer something that's even in my psyche. It's like I don't think about it because I've had a different experience. And I think sometimes you have to go through something hard, not necessarily, but to go through to find a deeper strength. And I'm experiencing that right now. So I don't know if that resonates.
Yeah. How do I pronounce your name again? Adrian?
Adrian.
Adrian. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Adrian, yeah. Look, man, I can relate to everything you said. 100%, man. It's very a lot of wisdom in what you said, mate. And it's I sort of, yeah. I guess my journey has been very similar, man. Like probably everything, literally everything you said, mate. Like about Joe Dispenza and the way we live with anxiety and compulsive thinking as if it's normal, when it's actually a form of neurotic activity, which creates disease, it creates dysfunction everywhere, mate, and that's the world we live in. So it's quite confronting to see that, because I've seen that very clearly uh, within myself and around me. And when you see it clearly, man, at the like we talked about, fear is unconscious a lot of the times, as the COVID example came up. And when you see it clearly, what's happening at the unconscious psyche, and because you can observe all that, right? If you can stay still and meditate and live in the world in that meditative way, the reality of what's happening energetically is absolutely mind blowing. To see the like people talk about the matrix, and how I see the matrix is not a physical place in the future, but the psychological reality right now is pretty much like that, because what you're unconscious to is a jail, right? The emotional trauma or the emotional baggage that you carry, the like you said, the conditioning and thought patterns. Most people are not aware of any of that, so it flows through into almost an automatic unconscious it's how they live, right? They're just repeating it, which Dispenza talks about too. I think he says 98% of our thoughts are the same every day, something like that. And when you see that, man, like it's not just a theory. When you can see that and see, you look into someone's eyes and see that there's not really a soul there, right?
Mhm.
Because there's like the glass lenses, the egoic glass lens is so strong that there's no attentional capacity left to connect. And the
Mhm.
big challenge we have, man, is, man, like technology is probably making it a bit harder. We're disconnecting from nature, from each other, which means we're destroying nature, we're destroying the planet, destroying each other. So that division, which is what I talk about that inner division that the ego creates, the separation requires the other, so Ukraine needs Russia, Russia needs
Yeah.
Ukraine, right? That manifesting into that, but also with nature, and we're just seeing it so much now, man. I think we're moving into a more, uh, we're going through a collective period of probably more lower consciousness. I think, from what I observe, more of the emotions and more negative thinking and stress, anxiety, and it's becoming. I'm sure a few things, COVID is probably a big factor. Like all that energy still lingers from what I can see. That's still staying around. So yeah, man, how we are in the micro reflects in the macro, right? So as you said, you know, it's a conscious evolution. It's a cycle, right? It's not good or bad. It's how we have been likely consciously evolving for a long time. So it's not to avoid or attack you know or judge what's happening in the individual or collective. It will rather to see that, like you said, man, you put it well. It's an opportunity to transcend. It's an opportunity to observe some of those thoughts. It's an opportunity to speak to someone, to connect with yourself again, and it's not pleasant. It's often uncomfortable, man. Um, and it's a bit of a journey. The psyche is it is the depths of the ocean and the darkest points of the ocean that you know but it doesn't kill you, mate. That's why we're here. That's why we're here in human form. That's really the only one purpose, to be honest, is because for me it's aligning, like Eckhart Tolle talks about, aligning with the impulse of the universe to consciously evolve. And when we're aligned with that, we're not individual anymore. That flow comes in,
Mhm.
and the sense that we're all an expression of the one, that reality comes in. And yeah, and this isn't conceptual, mate, but you talk to someone on a conceptual level, right? And who will come to you and say, that's not real, and how can you prove it? It's like, well, how do I prove something that doesn't have form? Or do you know what I mean? And then you get into there's that whole sort of yeah,
Well, I think
paradox.
what stands out is we're trying to, explain something that a lot of it is felt, but it's not in the mainstream, So the intellect, I do a positive intelligence program, and what I like about it is, it's very scientific because most people they need that science because it validates it like intellectual it the ego the ego needs to understand to validate it as real. Yet, we don't see atoms, we don't see particles, we don't see all that stuff. You know, we kind of forget we don't see those things, but they're proven in science, but we kind of forget that everything is sort of energy. And um but I do think that as you dive sort of deeper within and you realize that what I realize is that by trusting that intuition, trusting yourself, um, you will start listening as the mind quiets. You go, okay, my situation might not look, it might not be, I might have stuff that I need to, work on. My situation is not ideal, but I start to realize that certainty or doesn't necessarily come from having the outside world be exactly the way you expect it. And it's never is like that, because I think it's the internal that interprets that, So the internal is always interpreting, and that's why two people can live the same situation and have completely different experiences. And so real security and safety comes from within, and like cultivating that, and things like meditation. How do you make the mind ruminate less, or the head, so you can start hearing, like, like getting these subtle, feelings of like, oh, wow, this doesn't feel right, for me. And, I always go back to kids, because to me, it fascinates me how connected they are to nature.
Mate.
Yeah. And what do they say often? No, I don't want to eat, or I'm not hungry. And we tell them, like, have to, don't waste food, like all these things that, we start the whole conditioning process of scarcity. And I'm not saying it's not good to be conscious, but I think we start manipulating our kids into not trusting themselves, because we've had an experience in life, and we're not aware enough that our experience can change, that we can change that experience. So we naturally kind of just, throw it on to our kids, our conditioning. And so I guess that's the work of awakening. And you talked about Joe Dispenza, some of the stuff that goes on in this workshop, where people, all of a sudden, the person that was, that had the stage 4 cancer, or had certain disability, all of a sudden they have a different experience with themselves, and they go, I mean, I don't care anymore. And all of a sudden the thing goes away, I think we live in fascinating times, because there's, like when you have an oncologist who sends his patients to Joe Dispenza, you go, wow, okay. Yeah, I can't turn a blind eye anymore, because there's too much, there's testimonials and stories. And so I've always been connected somewhere, been drawn to that world, because intuitively, perhaps I'm an old soul, and you are as well. So something in us perhaps knows that there's more than than meets the eye.
Yeah, and it's I guess, yeah, it's interesting how you say that, because for myself, I didn't have one little bit of uh, growing up religious, spiritual at all in any way, basically zero, right? Until like I was 25. And the only thing, like you said, that the only reason why I ever even thought about it was the level of suffering that I had internalized basically over 25 years, and trying, and I guess nothing within the Western society and paradigm for me. There's this intuitive knowing, again, like you said, man, where does that come from? Who knows? Probably a past a past experience, previous to this lifetime, and I would say in my intuition. And yeah, it was it's like a pull, right? It's trying to pull you somewhere, but you've never known it and no one's ever told you. And then like the question came up to me, so like question came up like uh there must be more to life or something. Just came in my mind. And that was it, mate. And that what was that now? So 13 years ago. That was kind of the start for me of the inquiry into I guess, is there something more here? Like it's kind of like when you suffer to a certain point, man, there's enough pain and trauma to a certain point. It's like, I think for a lot of people, it's like, this can't be life, man. You know, you're forced, like you use the word force, which is very pertinent, mate. You're forced into an inquiry or into there's that opportunity to be forced anyway. I think most people would escape, right? They'd go the other way. I think most people because you know you'd through adversity and challenge. It is in the society we live in. It's more the escapism into whatever that is, right? Whatever form, alcohol or however that looks. So yeah, that's so for me. That journey just took me uh, Krishnamurti. I don't know if you've heard of Krishnamurti, but
Absolutely.
a number of years I would watch like I don't even know why I was watching it, mate. When I look back, I can understand it that like the spirit was connecting me to it intuitively. But I don't know why. It's just the only thing I'd ever seen that was telling me something, but I didn't know what. And you know what he's like, mate. He's not easy to listen to and understand because he goes straight to the paradox and he basically says, and I love his main teaching of understand the false and know your like the self awareness of your desire and fear and emotions. And when you see all that clearly, it'll fall away naturally with effortlessly.
Yeah.
And it's probably the most, I think, in today's age, the most profound statement you can make spiritually, because when we talk in the Western world about, um, because the psyche is so deep, it forces you to kind of go the opposite way, right? Like the Buddha kind of talked about the no self, or you're not all of that self, and that leads to suffering. It's kind of the same as what Krishnamurti is saying. It forces you to look at kind of the false, right? Like you said, the thoughts and emotions, and you're not that. And what you are can remain formless, if that makes sense. Whereas I think what's happening in the mainstream when people look at meditation and mindfulness, what's happening is it's from what I observe, it's falling within the pattern of, oh, I'll do that and then be this. I'll gain this. I'll do this meditation and I'll be still and I'll gain flow and all these, and you that same momentum of the psyche that's unconscious and subconscious. You might look on the surface like many people do, man. They might look, they might have the dreads, the look, meditate every day. They might even be in the monastery for 20 years, as Eckhart Tolle mentions and Krishnamurti mentions, right? They meet these monks for 30 years who turn around and say, man, this has all been a waste of time. Wow. And walk out the door, mate. And so for me, that's a real challenge, that meditation and stuff. It's got to be, it's quite an art, because people very easily fall into the pattern of, I think you know what I'm saying, of
Totally.
I'm doing this to gain this. And
Yeah.
yeah, whereas if you follow more the self-inquiry, which is meditation, by the way, it's observing, then it's like there's not really the space to be like to kind of follow that false story, or create, the ego wants to create a certain cling on to something, the unconscious wants to cling on to something. So if you go to the starting point, I'll just look at what's really happening and what is, and and I watch the anger arise and flow into my thoughts, and I watch my thoughts about, my thoughts from my violent, whatever, father, or however, whatever's flowing, and then I'll see this jealousy and desire and competition, my insecurity and fear, and because we're pretty much mostly all like that to some degree, man, to some level, until you allow it to unfold and it can calm down. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I guess the dissolving. What I like about Krishnamurti always is the observer. That's where I got the the observer came. For me, he just he talks about it in a very uh, different way, and it is sometimes hard to understand. But he was like, what's your intent? Like, what's the intent? Is the ego coming in, wants to manipulate or have, so just being noticing that, and noticing within you that's like there's two people sort of, and what, where the space are you, creating the space to see all that, or are you playing into that? Yeah. And I think, I mean, yeah, for sure. The state of affairs in the world is an indication of where we are. I do think there are people that are, waking up slowly. But I think, when you look at, if we were awake, we wouldn't need to, like, we would choose the right leaders, it just,
yeah,
like
yeah.
you say, it just naturally evolved, well, this, the old system would slowly, and perhaps it's a, you know breaking down and dissolving slowly, but I say there's still, a lot of resistance, because it is what we're used to,
Mm.
Um, I I can very much relate. Like, I mean, I think abundance is a piece that I would love to teach my kids, because I grew up in a family where a lot of the stresses, and I think my dad loved us dearly, but because he was always stressed out about money,
Mm.
surviving, that he couldn't be the best of himself. He couldn't relax and go, oh, look, I give you, I give you my time, I give you my love, I give you. So I think, that art for me just speaks to me. It feels like it's my life journey to to have a relationship with abundance that I've never had before, and that I think would shift me from the competitive state that's so ingrained into us, to a creative space where, like, I'm just there to serve. What emerges naturally from me, from that creation, and I connect that to my connection to divine, whatever is, like, what wants to emerge from me. Like, what a great way to live. And, like, imagine people saying, like, I'm gonna pursue the thing that I'm passionate or interested in, versus, like, being stuck in that, doing something where, in 10 years, 20 years might give you, might make you sick, might, might make you a bad parent, might, because you're, you're not honoring yourself, you're not loving yourself, you're not listening to yourself. So how can you give to those around you? Um, and yeah, I feel this sort of drive to have a different relationship to life, and have my kids see that unfolding would be would be pretty special and powerful, because they would go, oh wow, my dad was, went through this struggle and
Yeah.
he came out a certain way. Um, how, yeah. Well, I think I reached out because I saw your post and I go, wow, you're really back into it. And and
Yeah.
and now you're sharing with me that, you know, being a father and taking care of your kids that's a full-time job. Uh, it's so great that you're, it seems like you have a lot of pride, you know, around that. Well, what's the ultimate goal? You want to combine both and uh, with your business and
Yeah, so I guess obviously with kids, man, they're obviously always the first thought, mate, you know. They're sort of and it's interesting listening to you because man, I've seen their all of my kids, their creativity and flow and mate, they're the ones that should be uh teaching the world, man.
mm,
Like 100%. We we could literally revolutionize things quite quickly by stripping back all the karmic conditioning and generational and societal conditioning that we're all accustomed with, as you said, as adults, and allow kids to express that presence and flow in a safe way. And like you said, with their passions and love and learning. And hey, that's the fastest way you're gonna bring a new energy into the world, man. Because my kids are always, I think all kids are, but just I say my kids because obviously I see them, I see them a lot and I observe them, and I'm blown away, mate. I'll never be as creative, like, I just, as like my daughter, and just seeing her creativity, and it's just the flow state, man, and operation naturally. It's pretty mind blowing, and then yeah, and then to sort of juxtapose that, whether that's the right word to use, I don't know, sounded right, but with the system of school, which is a product of society. It's ultimately a product of the psychological underpinning that we live within, right? In society, which is the product of generational. There's a generational that's been created generationally through governments. So the schools are a function of that, and it's coming through in schools, more of the play based and mindfulness. Like you can see it slowly emerging, but the inertia and momentum, man, like it's that whole thing, right? Like you look at a school, man, and in theory there's this mindfulness, and in theory there's well-being, and in theory there's play, and in theory it's creativity, and it all looks amazing, mate. You could create a whole universe out of all this theory, but when you put it into the kind of a collective psyche that's there within the generations of that we have in society, the theory and the reality of the energy field there, it's almost it's coming through, but I don't know what the analogy is, man. It's sort of it's like there's a huge rock and you're trying to pour water through it or something. That's just
mm,
how strong that inertia is, man. And so coming back to what you said, mate, about being a father, and that is, just sort of that's got to be the primary, I guess, part of being a human being if you have kids, is to fall into that paternal or maternal role,
mm,
and that is to kind of try and protect them as much as possible from I don't really want them to go to school, man, to be honest. Not that school's overall bad, but generally the energy field is not conducive to the flow state. They're already there. So it's like, logically, it's like, why am I going to put someone who's going to exceed anything that a school could possibly teach them? And much more likely to take it away. Why put them there?
Yeah.
But you said about your father, man, that
Mm.
we're kind of constricted a lot in society, and especially now, man, with the cost of living and inflation, which is a manifestation of all the COVID chaos and insanity, which didn't need to happen. I said at the time, man, I posted on social media, and I'm sure other people did that. We're creating 10 times the problems.
Oh,
And then people attack you, and what are you saying? You want us all to die? And oh no, there's not, you go blah blah blah, and just for an opinion, man. It's exactly what's happened, mate. And we still got a few years, and the cost of living, and man, mental health, and
mm.
it's so it's creating. I guess it's creating conditions where, like you said, to serve and be present and in flow. It's not easy, mate, if you got to go to a job that, you're around people who take your energy away, and, there's, you know what I mean? You gotta earn money and do this. And like society is just backwards, man, to be honest. We need to be creating much better systems, which will happen if we can create much better conditions psychologically. And it starts within, man. And I guess we share a similar realization of that essence wanting to flow through certain people to bring that new energy into the world. And I see my kids doing that. Whether they do or not, who knows? But they certainly, you know, that's as part of a parent, I guess, trying to make sure that they can be present in that flow state and not too influenced by I mean, you can only limit it, but not too influenced by all of the
Mm. Well,
psychological stuff.
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, when you were sharing that, it made me think of Sadhguru, who raised his daughter. Like he says, I'm not going to teach her ABCs. I'm not even going to expose her. I'm just going to take her everywhere where I
Yeah.
would go. And she became like this dancer and figured out. And it's like life, it's that whole, the backwards piece is that life wants to express itself through her. If you just let her do that, it will take
Yeah.
care of itself, versus like that we're forcing, it's like we're forcing everybody to say, for example, like a fish is in his element, he knows what to do, but put everybody in the same sort of like, you know, in the same environment, tell them to sit down and do that. It for some it works out, but for others they feel like they're a square peg in a round hole, so to speak. Um, and yeah, I guess also I remember school, for me as well, and growing up with songs like Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, a teacher. Yeah, but I think what really speaks to me is like the energy field. You feel around some people,
Yeah.
it feels good. It feels natural. Um,